Tonight, we step into a quiet Michigan community where everyday life once felt safe until two disappearances shattered that peace. In 1981, 15-year-old Kimberly Louiselle vanished. Her youth stolen before she ever had the chance to grow up. 3 years later, in 1984, Cristina Castiglione, a 19-year-old with dreams, whose beginning was found murdered under similarly brutal circumstances. Both young women were discovered in remote wooded areas, abandoned far from help or answers. For decades, their cases turned cold. Families were forced to live with questions that never slept, wondering who could commit such cruelty and still walk freely among them. Rumors grew, suspects surfaced, and hope slowly faded as the years passed. But darkness doesn't always stay hidden. Advances in forensic science and relentless investigators would eventually uncover a truth buried for more than 40 years, revealing the monster who had been lurking in plain sight. A quiet town often offers an illusion of safety, where mornings are soft with the glow of sunlight filtering through trees and the laughter of children fills the air. Streets are lined with familiar faces, neighbors who nod in passing, and a rhythm of life that seems predictable. Yet, on a single morning in the early 1980s, that fragile illusion shattered. The ordinary became unimaginable. The calm surface of everyday life concealed shadows that no one anticipated. Beneath the smiles and the small talk, something sinister waited, hidden within the very fabric of the community. Kimberly Louiselle was only 15 when her life was stolen. She was a high school student with a gentle demeanor, a love for drawing, and a quiet determination to one day become a teacher. Her sketches were filled with the worlds she dreamed of exploring, an innocence and hope that seemed untouchable in the mind of those who knew her. Kimberly's life radiated a delicate vulnerability, a trust in the goodness of those around her. Her friends remembered her laughter, her shy curiosity, and the way she could brighten even the dullest classroom. She moved through her town with a blend of caution and joy, unaware that the shadows of the world were already circling. 2 years later, Cristina Castiglione's presence would also become entwined in this story. At 19, she was older, more independent, a university student who thrived in the energy of social connections and athletic pursuits. Cristina's warmth and extroversion made her well-liked and admired among her peers. She was the kind of young woman whose confidence masked a subtle awareness of the dangers that occasionally crept into everyday life. She loved the outdoors, sports, and the freedom that youth allows. Yet her trust in the normalcy of her environment would ultimately leave her exposed to forces she could never anticipate. The man whose life would intersect tragically with these young women was Charles David Shaw. He was a longtime resident of the same region, known to some neighbors only as a quiet, unassuming man. Yet his past revealed layers of disturbance, petty thefts, possession of illegal substances, and a frightening attempt at abduction. Shaw's presence within the town was unremarkable on the surface. He did not provoke fear openly, but beneath that calm exterior lurked behaviors that were methodical, controlled, and deeply unsettling. A person could walk past him every day without noticing the psychological turbulence within him, the impulses and obsessions that would eventually erupt into violence. Livingston County itself added another dimension to this dark narrative. Its forests, lakes, and open spaces were beautiful in the sunlight, idyllic in appearance, yet these natural landscapes became silent witnesses to human horror. In small communities, everyone knows everyone else's routines, yet the very intimacy of such towns can mask sinister secrets. People believed in safety, in the transparency of their neighbors' lives, and in the protection that community offered. But it was precisely this faith that allowed a predator to move unnoticed, blending into the environment, exploiting the very trust that defined the town's character. Even the geography played a silent, yet crucial role in these tragedies. Isolated parks, hidden trails, and secluded lake shores, spaces meant for peace and recreation, became unwitting stages for violence. Their quietude did not conceal the exit, amplified them. The serene appearance of the town sharply contrasted with the lurking danger, heightening a tension that would define the fates of Kimberly and Cristina. Nature, in its silence, bore witness to horrors the community could not yet perceive. Life in the town continued with its familiar rhythm. Children attended school, parents went to work, and routines persisted as if untouched by the darkness growing nearby. Yet for sommeil, an unspoken unease lingered, subtle tension without a name, a quiet precursor to devastation. The very normalcy of daily life, the trusting smiles, the safe paths home, the expectation of security created vulnerabilities that predators like Shah could exploit. Ordinary routines, comforting and mundane, became a perfect camouflage for violence. Psychologically, the town functioned as a closed system. Its residents assumed danger would announce itself, that threats would be visible or audible. Shaw's behavior contradicted that assumption entirely. Methodical, selective, and patient. He understood that invisibility was power. His calculated interactions, his meticulous planning, and his capacity to detach from the humanity of his victims exemplified traits common among organized offenders. He moved undetected, blending seamlessly into the rhythms of the community while harboring lethal intent. The human element was equally significant. Families trusted neighbors, friends relied on one another, and even the young victims felt secure in familiar spaces. Kimberly and Christina were products of this environment. Their innocence and trust, combined with Shaw's awareness of human behavior, created the conditions for tragedy. The town's hidden secrets were subtle, embedded in mundane routines, and exploited with chilling precision. Yet the town maintained its outward charm. Neighbors waved, children played, and forests and lakes remained inviting. The juxtaposition between ordinary life and unseen horror underscores the psychological complexity of these crimes. Evil did not hide in shadows, but in places assumed to be safe. Then, on a day that seemed no different than any other, that fragile illusion collapsed. Ordinary routines shattered, lives were lost, and the community confronted a reality it could not previously imagine. The quiet town's hidden secrets, once invisible, began to surface, revealing a darkness lying within one man's mind, and setting the stage for an investigation that would span decades. At the meeting point of innocence and malevolence, the ordinary turned terrifying. Familiar streets and calm lakes became spaces of fear. The townspeople, unaware of the predator nearby, realized that safety is fragile and evil can move silently, unseen, even as life seemed to continue unchanged. Yet darkness had always been present, patient, observing, waiting. Then, on a day that seemed ordinary, that fragile illusion shattered. The quiet town's hidden secrets surfaced, setting the stage for tragedies that would haunt families and the community for decades. Before tragedy struck, life appeared ordinary. Kimberly had spent her morning as usual, attending classes and chatting with friends. She was last seen leaving school, her backpack slung over her shoulder, laughter in her voice that masked any awareness of danger. No one could have known that these simple moments were the last impressions she would leave on her world. The ordinary routines that offered comfort became the stage for cruelty, demonstrating how vulnerability often hides within predictability. Christina's final hours followed a different rhythm, yet similarly ordinary. She was seen by classmates and acquaintances, engaging in casual conversation and attending lectures. Messages she sent in the days before her disappearance reflected normal plans, minor frustrations, and ordinary social interactions. Yet, subtle signs may have gone unnoticed. A postponed meeting, an unanswered text, or a fleeting unease that her intuition could not articulate. In hindsight, these small irregularities hinted at the encroaching danger that would soon shatter her life. The moments of disappearance, when separated from ordinary timelines, create a chilling contrast. For Kimberly, the last sightings were innocuous, seemingly trivial, yet they marked the threshold between safety and violence. No screams were heard, no struggle reported in public spaces. Likewise, Christina's disappearance involved ordinary settings. Streets she had walked countless times, routes that should have been familiar and safe. The predator operated quietly, strategically exploiting trust and routine to mask malevolent intent. In April of 1981, Kimberly's body was discovered at Island Lake State Recreation Area. The site, typically a refuge for families and weekend visitors, became a grim scene. Law enforcement noted signs of sexual assault, and the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The location, remote yet accessible, suggested careful planning by someone who understood both the geography and human behavior. Shadows of fear began to settle over the community, as whispers of horror mingled with disbelief. 2 years later, in March of 1983, Christina was found at Oak Grove State Game Area. Once again, a public yet isolated space was transformed into a crime scene. The parallels were undeniable. Sexual assault followed by strangulation, bodies placed deliberately, and locations chosen for seclusion. The similarities prompted investigators to consider the possibility of a serial offender. The pattern, methodical and calculated, revealed a disturbing intelligence and awareness of law enforcement limitations and community routines. Immediate responses to both crimes highlighted the challenges investigators faced. Police received frantic reports, raced to the scenes, and attempted to reconstruct the moments leading to death. Evidence was scattered and incomplete. Forensic methods of the early 1980s had limitations, and crucial traces could not always be preserved or interpreted. Witness accounts were inconsistent, and memories faded quickly. The environment, while picturesque, complicated searches, forests, lakes, and trails concealed clues, giving the predator an advantage even after the acts were discovered. Some witnesses reported odd behaviors or contradictory statements. Friends or neighbors who might have noticed subtle interactions were themselves unaware of their significance. In small communities, people often rationalize or dismiss unsettling observations, and patterns that could indicate danger were overlooked. The predator's ability to blend into everyday life created a gap between the event and its comprehension by the public. This gap, psychological in nature, magnified the tension surrounding the case. Investigators faced an initial lack of clear evidence. Items that might have held DNA or fingerprints were often contaminated or incomplete. The remote locations of both discoveries introduced variables. Weather, animal activity, and terrain altered the crime scenes. Early interviews produced conflicting accounts, and some individuals who might have offered clarity instead contributed confusion. The community watched, anxious and fearful, as ordinary safety seemed irrevocably compromised. The similarities between the cases became a source of growing concern. Both victims were young women, both targeted in isolated areas, both sexually assaulted and strangled, and both left in locations accessible yet concealed. This repeated methodology suggested premeditation, an understanding of victim behavior, and a cold, calculating mindset. The psychological profile emerging for the perpetrator indicated someone who was organized, deliberate, and patient, capable of planning acts that exploited trust and opportunity. Yet even with these patterns, ambiguity remained. Did the cases represent the work of a single offender, or were they coincidental? Early investigative methods lacked the capacity to connect subtle details with absolute certainty. The community oscillated between fear, speculation, and disbelief. Local media reported the crimes with growing alarm, emphasizing the randomness and horror of the events, while families struggled to reconcile public attention with private grief. As weeks passed, investigators collected evidence, yet every lead seemed uncertain. Subtle deviations in Kimberly's and Christina's routines, combined with the predator's invisibility, created a perplexing puzzle. Behavioral cues, later key to profiling, appeared as mere anomalies. Conflicting witness statements, incomplete timelines, and contradictory details intensified doubt. Early suspects were excluded, leaving the cases defying simple categorization. These crimes challenged assumptions about safety, proximity, and human predictability, revealing a pattern lurking beneath the surface that investigators could not yet confirm. Ultimately, the initial investigations painted a portrait of uncertainty. The predator's capacity to navigate ordinary life undetected, the ordinary routines of the victims, and the subtle manipulation of environment and trust combined to create a case that was simultaneously visible and invisible. It would take decades, new technology, and a relentless pursuit of truth to pierce the veil that shrouded these murders in mystery. As the community wrestled with grief and fear, the unresolved crimes left lasting psychological scars. Every unexplained detail became a fixation, a reminder that ordinary spaces could conceal extraordinary danger. In the silence between questions, investigators wondered, were these acts random tragedies, or the deliberate work of a mind shaped by forces beyond comprehension? This tension between what was known and what remained hidden set the stage for decades of investigation. Two isolated deaths gradually revealed a pattern, a chilling signature of a predator attuned to both the geography and predictable behaviors of his victims. The town, once secure, now existed under a persistent shadow, awaiting elusive answers. Once the initial shock settled, investigators launched into painstaking work, speaking to friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who had last seen Kimberly and Christina. Each interview offered fragments of memory, small observations that could hold clues. Yet despite thorough questioning, the cases quickly reached a standstill. Details were overlooked, timelines remained incomplete, and the evidence that might have provided a breakthrough remained elusive. The very ordinariness of the victims' routines complicated attempts to trace the perpetrator's movements, leaving investigators to navigate a labyrinth of uncertainty and partial truths. Police revisited crime scenes multiple times, attempting to reconstruct events. They examined surrounding trails, nearby roads, and possible access points. Yet in both cases, critical evidence had been compromised, whether by environmental factors, early investigative limitations, or simple human oversight. Small items, potentially containing forensic significance, were discarded or mishandled. Each gap in evidence added layers of frustration and doubt, both for the detectives and the families desperate for answers. As news of the murders spread, media attention intensified. Newspapers detailed every development, sometimes speculating on motives, potential suspects, and the terrifying possibility of a serial offender. Television coverage, though limited by the ERA, brought the tragedy to a wider audience, magnifying both awareness and anxiety. The public became both observer and participant, feeding on the tension between safety and vulnerability. The community, once confident in its security, now faced the unnerving realization that violence could strike quietly, invisibly, among familiar faces. The families endured the brunt of this exposure. Parents, siblings, and close friends were subjected to constant questioning, rumors, and public scrutiny. Each headline was a reminder of the loss they bore. Grief intertwined with frustration as the investigation stalled, and the lack of resolution prolonged suffering. For decades, parents carried both mourning and unanswered questions, a psychological weight that no social reassurance could alleviate. In the absence of immediate answers, theories proliferated. Some speculated on personal motives, perhaps anger, obsession, or resentment, drove a neighbor or acquaintance to act. These conjectures, while logical on one level, lacked confirmatory evidence. The idea of an intimate or personal grudge seemed plausible, given the secluded locations and the apparent knowledge of victims' routines. Yet concrete links remained elusive. Other theories suggested a more calculated, organized perpetrator. This hypothesis considered a criminal who meticulously planned each act, understood forensic limitations, and selected victims with care. The similarities between the cases sexual assault, strangulation, isolated disposal sites pointed to deliberate strategy. This line of thinking framed the offender not as impulsive, but as someone capable of long-term planning, careful observation, and exploiting environmental knowledge. It painted a picture of chilling foresight, where violence was executed with precision rather than randomness. A third possibility emerged from the ambiguity itself. Could the murders have been the work of someone unexpected, a third party unnoticed by the community? Perhaps a peripheral figure, a transient individual, or someone who interacted with the victims without arousing suspicion. This perspective emphasized the danger inherent in ordinary spaces, highlighting that those closest or most visible are not always the culprits. It also reminded investigators and the public alike that appearances could be deceiving, and that behavioral cues might mislead even the most diligent observers. As theories multiplied, the challenge became differentiating plausible lines of inquiry from conjecture. Investigators grappled with overlapping hypotheses, some rooted in behavioral analyses, others in circumstantial evidence. The media amplified both certainty and speculation, sometimes creating tension between public perception and investigative rigor. Families watched the story unfold externally, while internally navigating complex grief, distrust, and the longing for definitive answers. Questions naturally arose for anyone trying to make sense of the tragedies. If you were an investigator, which hypotheses would you pursue? Would you focus on personal motives, trusting that anger or obsession guided the acts? Would you consider a calculated offender who exploited opportunity and knowledge of the environment? Or would you entertain the unsettling possibility of an unexpected, overlooked third party, someone whose presence was invisible until the moment of action? Each line of thought illuminated different aspects of human behavior, risk, and vulnerability. Despite years of investigation, the cases remained unresolved, leaving the town in a liminal state between normalcy and fear. The repetition of patterns, the similarities in victim profiles, and the calculated placement of the bodies pointed toward something organized. Yet the lack of tangible evidence prevented definitive conclusions. Behavioral patterns suggested a predator with understanding of human trust, yet the gap between observation and proof persisted, maintaining the tension and mystery that defined these cold cases. Then, decades later, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: DNA analysis. A preserved sample from Christina's crime scene underwent forensic genetic genealogy, a method unavailable at the time of the original investigation. The technology allowed investigators to trace familial connections and narrow the field of suspects with unprecedented precision. Suddenly, theories that had dominated discussions for years faced a reckoning. What was once speculation and conjecture transformed into near certainty, as the science behind the evidence revealed the identity of a predator long thought elusive. This revelation reframed every previous hypothesis: the personal motive theory, the notion of a carefully organized killer, and the possibility of an overlooked third party could now be re-examined in light of the suspect's known behaviors, history, and psychological profile. DNA did not just identify the offender, it reshaped the narrative, providing clarity to decades of uncertainty and answering questions that had lingered in the minds of investigators, families, and the community. As the case returned to public attention, forensic science, behavioral analysis, and meticulous investigation highlighted the enduring value of persistence. Decades later, evidence spoke where human observation had failed. The suspect's identification in Christina's case challenged all prior theories, allowing investigators to connect patterns, reconcile inconsistencias, and glimpse the mind behind these horrific acts. The predator's silent signature, long hidden in plain sight, was finally revealed, illuminating the darkness that had haunted Livingston County for over 40 years and setting the stage for the final chapter. The revelation of Charles David Shaw's identity allowed investigators, psychologists, and the public to finally examine the mind behind the atrocities. Shaw was not overtly chaotic in appearance. He presented as a normal, even unremarkable, member of his community. Yet beneath this exterior lay a complex and disturbing psychological profile. A man whose actions were guided by sexual predation, control, and a chilling capacity for violence executed in silence. Shaw's behaviors reflected the hallmarks of a carefully organized offender. He studied routines, exploited trust, and selected victims who appeared vulnerable yet unsuspecting. His crimes were not impulsive. They were deliberate, calculated, and deeply personal in their manifestation. Experts analyzing the case noted patterns of obsession, control, and a distorted understanding of power, suggesting underlying psychological trauma and unresolved internal conflicts. These traits allowed him to operate unnoticed for years, blending into the ordinary fabric of the community while harboring intentions that defied comprehension. From a psychological standpoint, Shaw's actions can be interpreted as both reactive and compulsive. There was evidence of an internal struggle between desire, fear, and the need for dominance. He sought situations where he could exert absolute control without detection, a hallmark of certain sexual predators whose pathology intertwines gratification with secrecy. The tension between outward normalcy and inner turmoil offers insight into the mechanisms that allow such individuals to operate undetected, exploiting both environmental and social vulnerabilities. Applying Stoic philosophy illuminates the psychological dimensions of Shaw's conduct. The Stoics teach that human behavior is governed by desires and fears, that internal passions can override rational judgment. In Shaw's case, impulses driven by obsession, compulsion, and unresolved trauma dictated actions, suggesting that his moral compass was subordinated to internal drives. He understood the societal expectations of normalcy, yet manipulated those expectations to facilitate his crimes, revealing a mind both cunning and disturbingly rational within its own perverse framework. The Stoic principle that human suffering is universal and derived from perception rather than events themselves offers another lens. Shaw's perception of relationships, boundaries, and control was profoundly distorted. To him, the ordinary world provided opportunities rather than moral constraints. Understanding this distortion is critical for profiling offenders. Their actions are internally coherent, even when externally horrifying. The mind of the predator constructs its own logic, where power, secrecy, and domination justify the transgression of societal norms. With the advent of forensic genetic genealogy, the case reached a decisive turning point. DNA evidence confirmed Shaw as the perpetrator for both Kimberly and Christina. Yet the narrative took a bittersweet turn. Shaw had died in November 1983, months after Christina's murder. His death, a result of sexual asphyxiation, ensured that he would never face justice in a courtroom. The closure that science provided was thus incomplete in its legal dimension, leaving the families with relief tempered by the reality that the perpetrator had evaded formal accountability. Despite the inability to prosecute Shaw, identifying him brought profound psychological relief to the victims' families. Decades of uncertainty, fear, and unanswered questions were finally alleviated. Understanding the identity of the predator transformed abstract fear into concrete truth. It allowed mourning to evolve into a form of closure, enabling the community to confront the horror not as an unsolvable abstraction but as a historical reality anchored in evidence. Analyzing the impact on the community reveals how unresolved violence shapes collective consciousness. For 40 years, uncertainty permeated Livingston County. Fear, suspicion, and anxiety lingered, influencing behavior, social interactions, and perceptions of safety. Even the memory of ordinary routines was tinged with caution. As residents reflected on the hidden threats in their midst, the identification of Shaw did not erase the trauma, but transforming decades of lingering doubt into a narrative of truth and understanding. From a philosophical perspective, Shaw's case invites reflection on the nature of evil. Is it innate, a darkness inherent in certain individuals? Or is it cultivated by trauma, neglect, and psychological wounds? Shaw's actions demonstrate the interplay between disposition and circumstance, where unresolved internal conflicts manifest in acts that devastate innocent lives. His life and crimes provoke uncomfortable questions. Can evil exist independently? Or is it the product of human experience, shaped and amplified by societal and personal neglect? Furthermore, examining Shaw's behaviors through moral philosophy underscores the fragility of ethical boundaries. He operated within a world of choices, yet allowed compulsions to override conscience. The consequences were catastrophic, leaving a trail of grief, loss, and psychological scars. In this context, his case exemplifies how human agency, when distorted by trauma and desire, can produce acts that challenge comprehension and defy societal norms, leaving communities to grapple with both the reality and the ramifications of such evil. Ultimately, a profound philosophical question remains: is the devil born, or is he shaped by the scars humanity inflicts? The life of Shaw, marked by hidden trauma and predatory behavior, suggests that both inherent disposition and environmental wounds are inseparably intertwined. Psychological injuries may nurture destructive tendencies that, if left unaddressed, manifest in harmful actions. Yet, even when circumstances constrain, individual choices remain crucial to understanding moral responsibility. In analyzing Shaw's trajectory, we witness a complex intersection of innate traits, formative experiences, and conscious decisions. This convergence highlights how tragedy often arises not from a single factor but from the interplay of nature, nurture, and deliberate action, revealing the delicate balance between human vulnerability and accountability. The story of the Dark Mind revealed transcends the narrative of a single individual, offering a profound reflection on human vulnerability, the way society perceives danger, and the potential for harm that emerges when inner turmoil meets opportunity. Shaw's actions serve as a chilling reminder that understanding criminal behavior requires more than observing deeds alone. It demands a careful exploration of the psychological forces driving them. By examining these motivations, we gain insight into the complex interplay between personal pathology and environmental circumstances. Such analysis allows us to approach a deeper comprehension of these events, even in situations where conventional justice may be unattainable or insufficient, highlighting the limits of legal resolution. After 40 years, the truth finally emerged, casting light on long-held fears and unspoken grief. The families of Kimberly Louiselle and Christina Castiglione gained partial justice, yet the shadow of loss remains, a reminder that no revelation can fully restore what was stolen. The case underscores a chilling reality. Darkness can exist even within the most ordinary communities, hiding behind familiar faces and tranquil routines. True crime teaches us not only about acts of violence, but about human vulnerability, trust, and the fragility of perception. If fear is a mirror reflecting ourselves, then cases like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths about morality, trauma, and the shadows that dwell within human experience. Understanding the psychology of offenders, like Charles David Shaw, illuminates both his mind and the mechanisms by which ordinary lives can be shattered. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to Criminal Mindcast to explore more stories that linger in silence and shadow. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mind.